Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. If you're watching on the website, leave us a Google review, and if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation below. The email address is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk if you have any topics you'd like us to discuss. A podcast version of the show is also available on our website or from the main podcast platforms that you can see on the screen right now. Let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everybody. Lots of stuff happening in the property world at the moment, and no doubt that Paul's going to be throwing lots of questions, and I'll try and answer them the best I can.
Yeah, it's a complex one this week because the government has published full details of its Renters' Rights Bill. The government has just released full details of the bill, which delivers on Labour's manifesto, they say, committing to transforming the experience of private renting, including the ending of Section 21 evictions. The bill aims to improve the current system for both the 11 million private renters and 2.3 million landlords in England. The government's aim is to give renters much greater security and stability so they can stay in their homes for longer, build lives in their communities and avoid the risk of homelessness. The government says it will abolish Section 21 evictions and move to a simpler tenancy structure where all assured tenancies are periodic, providing more security for tenants and empowering them to challenge poor practice and unfair rent increases without fear of eviction. In short, they're going to ensure possession grounds are fair to both parties, giving tenants more security while ensuring landlords can recover their property when reasonable. Provide stronger protections against backdoor eviction by ensuring tenants are able to appeal excessive above market rents, which are purely designed to force them out. Introduce a new private rented sector landlord ombudsman that will provide quick, fair, impartial and binding resolution for tenants' complaints about their landlord. Create a private rented sector database to help landlords understand their legal obligations and demonstrate compliance. Give tenants strengthened rights to request a pet in the property, which the landlord must consider and cannot unreasonably refuse. Apply the Decent Homes standard to the private rented sector to give renters safer, better value homes and remove the blight of poor quality homes in local communities. Apply AWAB's law to the sector, setting clear legal expectations about the timeframes within which landlords in the private rented sector must take action to make homes safe when they contain serious hazards. Make it illegal for landlords and agents to discriminate against prospective tenants in receipt of benefits or with children. End the practice of rental bidding by prohibiting landlords and agents from asking for or accepting offers above the advertised rent. Strengthen local authority enforcement by expanding civil penalties, and strengthen rent repayment orders by extending them to superior landlords, doubling the maximum penalty and ensuring repeat offenders have to pay the maximum amount. Now, a lot of this, of course, we saw in the Tory version of the Renters Reform Bill, but this gives us a little bit more flesh on the bone. So what's your initial, before we look into the detail, because that's where the devil always is, what's your initial impression, Joe?
Yes, there's a lot there, and obviously they've gone into quite a lot of detail and set it out as they would like. I would my first and initial impression is that they really want to see the end of small private landlords here, because the expectation levels of what they want the landlords to do and accept is really now beyond their reach. So I think they've got their eyes on the bigger picture, and that's the corporate renting schemes where people like Tesco's and so forth are coming in as partnership with the local council and master developers in order to provide, they're building, what they call is build to rent. So they're building properties, flats, apartments, houses, etc., all over the places where they've got brownfield sites. And so that's the target, in my opinion. I mean, the small guy is not going to survive all of these things that they're expected to do. And we know that a lot of them are exiting the buy-to-let market, primarily because all of the cost, the taxations, and any breaks, any opportunities are just been taken away from them, Paul.
Yeah, there's certainly more legislation to observe, and there will be more cost for landlords, that's for sure. I mean, at the heart of the situation, of course, is the new tenancy agreement. Obviously, Section 21 goes, so you'll have to use Section 8 to make changes to a tenancy. But what they're going to do essentially is to remove fixed-term assured tenancies. That's when the renters are obliged to pay rent regardless of whether the property is up to standard, and they reduce flexibility to move in response to changing circumstances. For example, after a relationship breakup, or you want to take a new job elsewhere, or when buying your first home. Instead, all tenancies are going to be periodic, with tenants able to stay in their home until they decide to end the tenancy by giving 2 months' notice. This will end the injustice of tenants being trapped paying rent for substandard properties and offer more flexibility to both parties to respond to changing circumstances. So on the face of it, most people in the country, I suspect, Joe, see, well, that seems fair enough.
Yes, I suppose most people that are renting will seem it's fair enough. I wouldn't think landlords would think it's particularly fair enough, but especially when you think that the periodic tenancy agreement that will come into force will give the tenant all of the ammunition of not paying the rent, and presenting their circumstances to a landlord and saying, well, actually, I'm changing job, or I'm getting separated from my partner, or whatever that circumstances might be. I can't afford to pay the rent for the next 2 months. As long as he's given that notice, the landlord is completely stuffed because he's got to still make his mortgage payments. And, what is he going to do? So I think, this is very tenant focused. And I think that the small landlord, the one who's got a portfolio of maybe 1 to 5, is going to really struggle with these situations, especially if they've all got some sort of buy-to-let mortgages on them, and they're looking to make sure that that mortgage payment is covered every month without fail, and then all of a sudden might have a gap for 2 to 3 months, and that just knocks them right out. So if there's any margin of growth or profit in it, that will be taken out in those times that they decide not to. And because of the periodic tenancy that they're now proposing, you can't give, or you can't give the reasons to a tenant why they need to leave. So I think it's very tenant focused, and I think you'll get, if there's always been talk about landlords being abusive or abusing their position. I think you're going to find that the tenants are going to be even worse, and they're stuck with them. So that's where I think that the small guy will end up saying, well, you know what, it's time for me to pack my bags from this buy-to-let market, and exit. And then you've got to just look at the corporates, and there's a lot of that happening, generally. So it will pick up quicker. They're building bigger blocks quicker, units, and more in the same place. So management structures, and all sorts of other things take a big change. So, for example, if you had a Tesco's or a John Lewis in your town, and they had the space and above and to the side and around the car park, etc., they could actually accommodate a couple of hundred homes. They have a good control on that. Whereas all the small landlords are going to say, well, actually, I'd let them have it. I don't really want the hassle anymore.
Yeah, so they say that landlords must, as in the current system, go to court if a tenant does not leave. They will need to provide evidence that the grounds is met. For mandatory grounds, the court must award possession if the ground is proven. For discretionary grounds, the court can consider if eviction is reasonable, even when the grounds are met. Where a tenant is at fault, landlords can give notice, usually using the relevant grounds at any point in the tenancy. This includes when the tenant commits antisocial behaviour, is damaging the property, or falls into significant arrears. So they're introducing new protections for the tenants, so this is your point here, who temporarily fall into rent arrears, both supporting the parties on each side by preventing tenancies which are otherwise viable from ending. So they increase the mandatory threshold for eviction from 2 to 3 months arrears, so you've got to have them in there an extra month and increase the notice period from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So you basically have to give them 4 weeks notice after the third month, and then you can start your proceedings, whereas it used to be 2 weeks and you could do that in 2 months. This allows the tenant more time to repay arrears and remain in their homes while ensuring landlords do not face unsustainable costs. Landlords can also continue to use the discretionary rent arrear grounds, for example, if rent is repeatedly late. So if you're getting it late or they continue to be 1 or 2 months behind all the time, then you still can go and go to the court on discretionary grounds. So there is a mechanism clearly stated there. You've just got to give them a little bit more time, I guess, which in the current circumstances, I suppose, maybe many people would say landlords just have to accept that that's the world we live in now.
Yeah, but landlords, Paul, have been having to accept the world we live in for a number of years now. You know, when COVID came along, they were told they couldn't get anybody out, and that period lasted, and there's still a backlash of all of that. Then we had the situation with an increase in cost of living, which meant that they were carrying the burden of higher mortgage payments, whilst tenants could not actually afford to pay any more. So I think the landlords have carried plenty over the last 6, 7 years, and this thing is only going to put a noose around their neck by saying, well, you know, thank you very much, we're done. But the sad thing is that these governments and the local councils are desperate to have landlords buy these properties so that they can house these tenants that they've got. They've got loads and loads of people on their lists are waiting as homeless. They're crying wolf all the time to say, you know, we've got all these homeless people, where are we going to put them? We're going to build 15,000 new homes as predicted by this new Labour regime. You know, where are they going to find those? So if they are not really looking in the cupboard properly, and before they start to say, you know, these reforms and these things got to happen to all the landlords, the council are also landlords, and most of their properties are disgusting. You know, they need to actually look in the mirror and look at their own house first before they start to tell how everybody else should run theirs. I'm not particularly happy about this whole process. And from an agent's point of view, whether you're a letting estate agent or auctioneer, you know, these circumstances don't actually help. I mean, in order to sell a property with a sitting in tenant, you know, A, it's harder because it doesn't give the right return on yield. B, the next person is thinking, well, actually, do I want to take on a bag of problems that somebody else had? And the first person is thinking, well, I actually got to sell it for much less than I thought I was going to get because I've got this pain in the rear tenant in there and I'm not getting my money. So, you know, it's not a win-win situation by any stretch of the imagination.
No, they're saying that the landlord's circumstances can also change, and they recognise that. They say that they have strength and rights to reclaim properties when it's necessary, for example, to sell or move in. So tenants will benefit from a 12-month protected period at the beginning of the tenancy, during which landlords cannot evict them or move in or sell the property. Landlords will then be able to give 4 months' notice. So they'll be able to be in the property for 16 months, assuming that they can keep their nose clean. When using these grounds, giving tenants more time to find a new home and reduce the risk of homelessness. So they're in there for 16 months and then you've got 4 months to give notice. So you're going to have to make a commitment of best part of a year and a half, assuming you get a good tenant. But again, in some respects, I suppose if you get a good regular paying tenant, then none of this is really too much of a ball ache, is it really? I mean, it just continues to work well because the good tenants want somewhere to stay and put their roots down, surely.
That is true. And it has all worked quite well until now when these clever clogs come along to mess up the system. What you don't understand is that the tenants now are getting so much more rights. It's a pain trying to deal with them in the first place. You have to take on board that the tenants that sometimes are given to these landlords are not your top quality tenants. They may have been in poor circumstances and the council has had to house them somewhere, and they house them, and then that bag of troubles comes to that landlord. And if they want that tenant to exit, it is the council that actually makes life miserable for the landlord, because they tell the tenant, you stay where you are, you've got all these rights, because we actually haven't got anywhere else to put you. So in the meantime, you may as well, mess up your landlord's life, because we can't afford to. We haven't got any other properties, because guess what? We've sold them all and pocketed the money and got rid of all the good things. And now we haven't got the properties. And now we've got to make the landlords like so. You know, it worked well for years and years. I mean, and the punishment of this whole story really is, in my mind, is maybe there are a few, handful, two or three bad rogue landlords that then have brought the whole good people into this catchment, and that's the fear that also the good people will start to get bad tenants. And the problem is, Paul, what you have to take on board is that it's all very well theoretically, but once you're in the property, once you're in it, it's a job and a half to get you out of it. So, you have to think about how that works. And we've just talked it, and you just covered it by saying you've got to go to court, you've got to apply for this, you've got to apply for that. Well, those that have worked with the court system will know that you may not get a court date or a court hearing or a court even suggesting that you have got a chance, because they've now going to introduce all sorts of remedies to try and resolve these things prior to coming to court. So if you're not resolving that for 3 or 4 or 5 months, for that 3 or 4 or 5 months, the tenant isn't paying the rent. I've been in an argument. The landlord is getting in arrears. The tenant is sitting in a property that he can't shift with, and the council are saying, "Stay where you are because we haven't got anywhere else to house you." So it's not as rosy as they think it is. I think it's actually going to be a farce, and so therefore the commercial corporate landlords can take up all this because they've got the funds and the facilities and the muscle power and the legal power to go to the courts and deal with it at the level. But the small, accidental hobby landlord, I think we'll see a mass exodus of that in the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, if you're working with those councils and with some of those difficult tenants, then I think the warning signs are very much there for you, and maybe move to find properties where you can have a more stable tenant, shall we just put it like that. But it's interesting also, and there's a massive paragraph here that is only quite short, but I think is a really, really poignant point of this, or part of this rather. And that is, to support compliance with requirements introduced elsewhere in this bill, we will prevent landlords gaining possession if they have not properly protected a tenant's deposit or registered their property on the private rented sector database. We will ensure landlords are always able to rectify non-compliance so they are not prevented from regaining possession indefinitely. These restrictions will not apply to antisocial behavioural grounds. So, in other words, if you haven't followed the letter of the law, and then you apply to get your property back, you will not get it unless you've done everything right. And if you haven't, you're going to have to go back and repair what you've done wrong or missed, so that you can then get your property. So that is a big issue that some might fall at, I suspect.
Well, yes, and then you combine that with the cost of legal advised legal services. You may as well keep your money in the bank and sit there and earn your interest and not get involved in this, because that's all you're going to do. So yes, this is a room for the corporates to take on all the troubles, and the small guy is not going to. And yes, what other property investment? There's lots of other property investment, genuinely good property investments, other than to manage a buy to let. There are, life tenancies that you can buy, which what the story is. You're buying them at a relatively cost-effective price, and the gamble is the time that person is going to be there or they'll expire. So it might be 5-10 years before you get that, but you could probably be in a legal battle for 2 years. So it's not a great loss by looking at other sources. And of course, commercial property. Now, commercial property has a different view than it used to. Commercial property in itself, as an investment, maybe you shop and uppers, you still got the flats, or just a row of shops, or some warehousing and storage, because, the kind of services that are required have now dramatically changed, because there was a time when you used to want an office block with, a big corporate. But the problem with the office block and a corporate is they're now working, some from home, hybrid, some from home and some from the office. So they don't need a bigger space. In fact, over the last 10 years, a good number of offices have been converted into residential flats, because they actually are more viable than being in it as a commercial office. So, there are other opportunities that people can look at, but I certainly don't think that this is a good step, whether it was Conservative or Labour. I think they haven't really looked at the damage they're going to do to the private rental landlord.
Yeah, I can see landlords with multiple properties in the future having to have a small legal department or retain the services of a property specialist to just navigate through all of this. But they say rent increases in the private rented sector will be made using the same process. Landlords will be able to increase rents once per year to the market rate. The price could be achieved or would be achieved if the property was newly advertised to let. To do this, they will need to serve a simple Section 13 notice setting out the new rent and giving at least 2 months' notice of it taking effect. If a tenant believes the proposed rent increase exceeds market rate, they can then challenge this at the first tier tribunal, who will determine what the market rent should be. They will reform how the tribunal works to ensure tenants feel confident in challenging poor practice and enforcing their rights. Currently, tenants face the risk that the tribunal may increase rent beyond what the landlord initially proposed. They will end this, so tenants will never pay more than what the landlord asked for. We will also end the practice of backdating rent increases, with the new rent instead applying to the date of the tribunal determination, to ensure tenants are not unexpectedly thrust into debt. And in cases of undue hardship, they will give the tribunal the power to defer rent increases by up to a further 2 months. So again, plenty to digest there. I think the thing to move on to now is the implementation. There's going to be a date set. It's almost like decimalisation or something like that, or the day we went into Europe. They're going to have a date where everything changes on the same date pretty much, and all those tenancies in existence will move over to the periodic term version that you talked about, Joe, and all tenancies that start on that date or beyond will be under the new agreement. So there's going to be, I suspect, plenty of advertising and awareness of when that all changes, and this is going to stop any confusion, they say, between people on the new deal, people on the old deal, and you can see perhaps why they would want to do that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I get that, and long that day may not come, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, these are inevitable changes, and of course, we will advise and guide our clients the best we can to make sure that they mitigate these situations. But I'd certainly, I'm not a lover of what is about to happen.
Yeah, the only delay to that process will be the social rented sector, because they realise that they've got additional complications and they've had to refer it to the regulator of social housing so they can update their tenancy standard in the meantime. But what's interesting, actually, they say they've expanded the grounds for eviction, and to some extent they have, although they've taken away no fault eviction, so you just want to get rid of them because you just want to get rid of them. That's gone, and you can only really move in now, or you can only change it to move in or to sell, of course. But there are plenty more strengthenings going on in terms of when you can intervene to get rid of, and the processes are fairly quick. So obviously things like antisocial behaviour, criminal behaviour, you can begin eviction immediately on that one. No wait needed, or no notice to be given. If they've got no right to rent, so at least one of the tenants have no right to be there under immigration law, you can start that process in 2 weeks. Rent arrears, by that time they've probably run away. The tenant has at least 3 months or 13 weeks if rent is paid weekly or fortnightly. Rent arrears both at the time served of the notice and at the time of the possession hearing. You've got 4 weeks on discretionary grounds there. The suitable alternative accommodation is available for the tenant, 2 months notice there. Any rent arrears, 4 weeks that you can, after you've got 3 months, of course. If the tenant is persistently delaying their rent or delayed paying it, 4 weeks notice there. 2 weeks for breach of tenancy. Deterioration of property, so they're not looking after it, 2 weeks there. That's quite interesting. Antisocial behaviour immediately, as we said. Domestic abuse. A social landlord wishes to evict a perpetrator of domestic abuse if the partner has fled and is unlikely to return. That's 2 weeks. And here's a new one, and I just thought I'd float this one past you, particularly as it's been quite topical over the summer. Rioting is a new one. A tenant or another adult living at a property has been convicted of an indictable offence which took place at a riot in the UK. 2 weeks' notice you can give them for that. So not only will they go to jail for saying nasty things on Facebook, but they'll also lose their home as well. Deterioration of furniture. The tenant has caused the condition of the furniture to deteriorate. You can get rid of them in 2 weeks for that. False statement. If the tenancy was granted due to a false statement, 2 weeks there. And supported accommodation. The tenancy is for supported accommodation, and the tenant is refusing to engage with the support. You can get them out there. So if they're not working with their social worker, for example, 4 weeks to get them out there. So to some extent, that has some teeth.
A lot of teeth, Paul. A lot of teeth for something that is not really there. I mean, rioting and all that sort of antisocial behaviour. But I think the bigger picture is that you're stuffed with unsuitable tenants, which will have more rights, and the landlords will suffer tremendously on this junction. But what these governments don't realise is that they're going to suffer even more, because as these landlords exit the buy-to-let market, they're going to have to find the accommodation. So they need to, step up the planning situation, and of course building and developing and accommodating through corporate tenancies. There's not any words in any of this that makes me comfortable and say to somebody that this is a great idea. I mean, we used to say, go and buy yourself a flat to rent out, because I think it's a great investment. They normally are a great investment because the house prices tend to go up. But if you've got a property that is actually going to seep blood all the way through, and it's just going to seep your money all the way through, then it's not really advisable to look at that sort of thing as a good investment.
They talk about the county courts. They're saying, as now, landlords will only need to go through the courts in a small minority of cases where a tenant doesn't leave at the end of the notice period. Ultimately, they expect that their rental reforms will reduce demand on the courts, because only cases where there is a clear, well-evidenced ground for possession will be able to proceed. They want to ensure that wherever possible court action is the last result. The Renters' Rights Bill makes provision for the Ombudsman to provide landlord-initiated mediation, enabling disputes to be resolved before they escalate to court. They're working with the Ministry of Justice to explore further options for the early dispute resolution. And the Ombudsman is the last thing perhaps to discuss around this. Obviously, there is going to be a new private rented sector landlord Ombudsman service, which all private landlords in England with assured or regulated tenancies will be required to join by law, including those who use a managing agent. So agents are going to be involved in this whole process too, as you might expect. Tenants will be able to use the service for free to complain about landlords' actions or behaviours. Service will offer fair, impartial and binding resolutions for tenants, and will have powers to compel landlords to issue an apology, provide information, take remedial action and or pay compensation. Service will also benefit landlords by resolving tenant-initiated complaints in the quickest and most cost-effective way possible. Landlords will also have access to guidance and support from the Ombudsman Service to help them improve their complaint handling practices. So there will be civil penalties of up to £7,000 for initial breaches, and up to £40,000 for criminal prosecution for continued or repeated breaches. Tenants will be able to seek rent repayment orders against their landlord if the landlord commits an offence by persistently failing to join the Ombudsman Service. So there's no doubt in that landlords are going to have to put their hand in their pocket and pay for an Ombudsman service. But I guess in a way that could work well, in that it will keep things out of the courts to some extent.
Yes, fingers crossed, Paul, on that, I'm afraid. But yeah, it's a great story, and one that we're going to have to watch very, very carefully. going forward. But there's nothing in any of that today that you brought to our attention that gave me an excitement for advice or guidance or anything for future landlords.
Well, we wait to see when this gains royal assent and also when the date is that the implementation will take place. And I'm sure we'll come back and visit this and get Joe's emotional reactions at the time. That's all for Property Matters today. We'll see you again very soon.